Windows XP is turning 20 years old this year. Hard to believe as it really doesn't feel that long ago, but it is true. Many years have passed since it's been released and many other versions of Windows have surpassed it. From the botched launch of Windows Vista, the legendary Windows 7, the laughably bad Windows 8, and the gets better over time Windows 10. Despite Windows XP being 20 years old, roughly 25 million PCs were still running Windows XP as of last year, and its market share among Windows versions still stands at 0.59%, which is still a bigger market share than Vista. Being that Windows XP is turning 20 this year, I got thinking, could you use Windows XP in 2021? Well, this video aims to answer that question, but in a more in-depth way than the typical using old OS a long time after its release type video. I'm going to be sitting down with a physical machine, running XP, load it up with a bunch of software, update it fully, and use it regularly and exclusively for one whole month. To really find out, has XP finally reached retirement age, or is it still viable-ish as a daily driver? And to add that little extra bit of challenge, not only am I going to be using XP for a month, I'll be completely making this video on XP. Everything from the script I'm reading right now, to the audio recording of this narration, to the final edit of the video will be done on XP. So to start this off, we might as well get acquainted with the computer that will be powering this experiment. Say hello to my battered 2009 Dell Studio XPS 435T, or Studio XPS 9000 if you prefer. It's definitely not as pretty as it was new, having endured many back and forth trips in the trunk of a car, along with the electrical tape holding on the front bay doors, but it's a reliable old beast with plenty of power to get us through the month. Taking a look under the hood, you'll find an Intel Core i7-920 clocked at 2.93 GHz, a 2GB AMD Radeon R9 370, 4GB of RAM, the max Windows XP 32-bit will support, a Western Digital Caviar Blue 7200 RPM 500GB hard drive, along with an Asus DVD-RW drive and Sound Blaster XFI Extreme sound card. All in all, a hardware setup that, despite being over a decade old in some spots, is still a somewhat capable machine today. And I should know, considering it was my daily machine for a good few years, with the only difference being a slightly bigger hard drive, a GTX 1063GB in place of the Radeon, and around 10GB of RAM, of course along with Windows 7 instead of Windows XP. Speaking of XP, we might as well move on to my install of Windows I'll be using. A fairly stock copy of Windows XP Professional Service Pack 3, aside from installing a program called WinSplit Revolution, a handy tool that integrates a Windows Snap functionality similar to the one in Windows 7 and newer versions of Windows. Other than WinSplit, I've also installed Office 2010, Vegas 10, which is the latest version for Windows XP, and Audacity 2.1 is the software I'll be using to actually make this video on. As far as internet browsing goes, you're pretty limited when it comes to choice nowadays. Google's last release of Chrome for XP was Chrome 49, released in March of 2016. The last version of Firefox was the extended support release of 52.9, and although it has been usable for a long while, it has started to show its age. The browser I've decided to go with is MyPal, an open source lightweight browser based on Pale Moon. In my testing and use, it seems to be the best browser to use on XP currently.
Can I get the camera for 1 second? And now back to our regularly scheduled program.
One issue you may run into in using XP today is getting updates for it. Windows XP is no longer able to communicate with Microsoft's update servers, meaning that the built-in Windows Update program no longer works. However, there is a workaround for this, known as the Windows Update Mini Tool, a client that can be used to obtain important updates to Windows XP. These updates are actually very important in order to have a properly functioning and up-to-date version of Windows XP, especially for my needs. I will link a video in the description on how to install these updates using the Mini Tool. Finally, one other issue that I was going to have to tackle was Steam. Valve dropped support for Windows XP and Windows Vista back in 2019. And although the client still seemed to work just fine for a good while after the cutoff date, when Valve updated the client in late 2019, Steam's older client suddenly refused to work on XP. I know from previous experience on other XP rigs that Steam suddenly would refuse to work on XP after that, which was a huge pain since a lot of my PC library of games are on my Steam account. In fact, a lot of games also require Steam to be running in order to play. Thankfully, much like Windows Update, there is a workaround, or in this case, a simple fix to this issue. I will link another video in the description that has a good tutorial on applying this fix. The fix simply entails installing Steam, running it once, then ending the process, grabbing a version of the packageinfo.vdf file from a modern machine running Steam, and placing it into the app cache folder, and then also running a proxy to get the client to connect to the server correctly. I know that sounds like a bit of a hassle to get Steam running, but it's necessary to get Steam up and running and play games, at least Steam games, on XP, and really isn't a huge deal once you get used to it. Well, now that we've gotten our introductory bits of the video out of the way, I suppose it's time to get down to the real experience. What has it been like for the past month? Well, to answer that question with an unsurprising answer, at least for me, it's been pretty normal. Going back to XP is honestly far easier than I think a lot of people would expect. With XP being 20 years old now, it performs surprisingly well for its age, although a large part of that can be attributed to its fairly long support period. Prior Windows releases typically had around a roughly 6 to 8 year support period. Windows 98's extended support ended in July of 2006, 8 years after its initial release in June of 1998. Same for Windows 95, with its extended support ending in December of 2001, 6 years after its release in August of 1995. Windows XP, however, is a different story. With XP's initial launch in October of 2001, you would expect its cutoff date to be somewhere roughly around 2009 or maybe 2010. However, Windows XP's actual cutoff date was April 8, 2004, at least for PC-based versions of Windows XP. Point of service and ATM versions of XP had continued support until 2016. And even after XP's cutoff date, plenty of third-party software would continue to support XP post-support. It seems only recently that a lot of software vendors, particularly antivirus solutions, dropped support for XP, which seems fair considering it was bordering on 20 years old, and now is, in fact, 20 years old. A large factor that sort of artificially extended XP's lifespan was the botched launch of Vista, due to its infamous problems including hardware compatibility, general performance problems, annoying security features, etc. Because of these issues, many home users and especially businesses decided to stick with XP instead of moving to Vista, meaning XP's install base remained massive, and thus Microsoft was sort of obligated to continue support for XP, at least for the time being. Going back to XP isn't really a huge jump from more modern versions of Windows, at least on the surface. You still have the familiar layout of Windows and everything functions generally the same. Though, I will say in going back to XP, there was at least one thing I definitely noticed was absent from the system: the search bar. Windows 10's search bar is honestly one of the best things, to me at least, about Windows 10's UI. It's fast and generally quite accurate. If you need a file, help article, or really anything, the search bar can find it for you with ease. The search bar is absent from Windows XP, aside from the Windows Live search bar, a later addition introduced via Windows Update. It isn't nearly as useful or fast. I've used it a total of about 2 times, 3 if you count me demoing it here. But other than that, going back to XP was fairly easy to get used to, after I got over the initial nostalgia overload of the first few days. Moving on, one of the most important tests for a daily driver OS is internet usage. How well does XP fare when it comes to using the current internet? The answer is, it handles it well enough. Not absolutely perfect, but far from unusable. When using MyPal, it does feel pretty smooth about 90% of the time. The vast majority of websites load and run without issue, with a minor hint of slowdown here and there, but nothing really bad. However, the experience is not completely trouble-free. Although it is very usable most of the time, there are some issues when it comes to stability. Not major ones, but MyPal does have a tendency to crash on occasion. In my experience, it's been usually at least once a day, 2 if it's a really unlucky day. However, it's not anything major, as simply closing and reopening MyPal fixes the problem. And MyPal has a tab restore function if it detects that the program crashed, so I can get right back to whatever I was doing. Perhaps the only website that I felt was a bit slow as far as performance goes was YouTube. Every time I open YouTube pages in a new tab, or even go from the home page to a video, my PAL will lock up for a few seconds while the HTML5 player initializes. Not a huge issue, but one that was very noticeable over the last month. However, this last month was not entirely smooth sailing for my XP experience. One problem I encountered in particular is one I want to talk about in this video. The problem started while I was benchmarking games. I had noticed that games were running a bit more sluggish than they realistically should have been given the hardware I was running them on, though some of that can be attributed to Windows XP itself being a 32-bit operating system with an older version of DirectX. The real issue started when I was trying out Euro Truck Simulator 2, with the latest version for XP being 1.35. I noticed that after playing for a few minutes, the game would suddenly slow to a crawl, like slideshow territory. However, it would only occur when driving in the open world. When opening the pause menu, the game suddenly ran smooth again, at least until I decided to go back into the game, then it slowed down to a crawl again. And so that's where troubleshooting began. First looking for fixes for the slowdown after coming across dozens of the same answers telling me to verify integrity of game files through Steam. However, that did pretty much nothing. After searching through more threads, I eventually decided that the next step would be to try reinstalling graphics drivers. And this is where the real troubleshooting journey began. I uninstalled the AMD drivers, restarted, installed them again, and restarted, only to be met with a blue screen. Restarting again would also meet with a blue screen. Trying to enter safe mode would cause the system to hang. What was strange as well was the stop codes were different almost every time, relating to all sorts of different problems, and sometimes I wouldn't even get a blue screen. The Windows loading screen would simply lock up and force me to reboot. Upon googling some of the stop codes and worryingly learning that some could be associated with a dying board, things got stressful to say the least. Every so often, I was able to get into a Windows session for a short time, usually only lasting for a minute or two after logging in, which is when I suspected that maybe the graphics drivers were not the cause of the problem. I eventually noticed when booting into safe mode that the system would hang on a file that I eventually discovered was related to Avast. So the next time I was able to boot into a Windows session, I made a beeline for the control panel and uninstalled Avast immediately to see if the problem went away. And it did. At least for now. Cut to the next day. I fire up the machine and I am met with the unwelcome sight of a blue screen yet again. And just like last time, each time I restarted I would get different stop codes and different files. I even got a few warnings from Windows telling me that an important system file is corrupt or missing and that Windows can't boot, suggesting that I use the recovery console on the install disk. I, unfortunately, don't have an install disk for this install of Windows. It was installed through USB, and I had no way of making a bootable USB since I couldn't get into Windows. Utterly stumped, I decided maybe it would be best to make a bootable Hiren's boot CD USB from my Linux notebook, save all the files I could, and reinstall Windows, hoping that maybe that would solve my issue. Before I went forward with that plan, however, I decided to turn my attention to the hardware side of things, to see if maybe something there was causing this issue. I had encountered an issue like this when I first started using this machine in September, and strangely enough the fix, at least for a while, was to unplug and reseat the CPU power connector. However, trying this method this time did nothing. I then decided to see if the board would acknowledge missing RAM, as that would be a good indicator if the board was dead/dying. I removed both sticks of RAM, powered up the machine, and sure enough, it noticed there was no RAM, which is what immediately caused me to turn my suspicion to the RAM itself. Moving the two sticks I had installed to different slots on the board. And this fixed the issue. Since then I have had no other issues and haven't seen a blue screen since. This experience is one that I'm kind of glad made into the video, as it brought me back to the incredibly stressful days of troubleshooting an issue like this with XP. Though I've had to troubleshoot issues like this on many other XP machines in my collection, a lot of the time I treat it as more of an annoyance than a serious issue, since there's never really anything on my machine that I care that much about losing. It's just a simple reinstall to get it going again, if that's what it ends up being. Sometimes I do end up finding whatever issue caused the problem. but I haven't used XP as my daily in over 6 years, and I completely forgot what it was like having to fight with your computer to get your personal and important files off of it, or at least get the system working correctly again. Nowadays, with Windows 10, troubleshooting is so much simpler and less cumbersome. It offers a built-in troubleshoot menu that it will automatically boot to if the system runs into an issue on startup. Anyways, with that little tangent over, I suppose we can move on to the next segment of the video. Though I have gamed on many Windows XP machines over the years, everything from a Pentium 3 to a Pentium 4 HT, Athlon XP, and Core 2, I've never had the Windows XP gaming experience on a machine of this spec before, and indeed, that was actually one of the main reasons I wanted to use this machine. I could have picked any humdrum Core 2 or Athlon X2 powered machine and called it a day, which in retrospect I'm glad I didn't, as you'll find out later in the video. But I wanted a machine that could still deliver a decent gaming experience. I was curious to try games that I've always known supported XP, but simply never had the XP rig to try them out on. So, without further ado, here are some benchmarks for some games that I played throughout the last month.
Another life to save? I'll keep my eye on you. More than that, I cannot promise.
Tot stinken Sie noch erbärmlicher. Kommt, lasst uns hier verschwinden, bevor Sie nochmal angreifen.
Töten wir sie. Genau wie diese dreckigen Schweine.
Was bitte?
Nur billigen Plunder, der sie wohl an ihre Heimat erinnern sollte.
Nein! Großes Schwein, du hättest wieder tot bleiben sollen.
Was ist das?
Dmitri, finish those rats.
Once again, you cheat death. Our tanks are ready to smash this line, and...
Chernov, I am not hearing gunshots.
There is no point, Sergeant. They are already bleeding to death. Then maybe our friend will help them bleed faster.
Burn the wheat field. I want the nose gun. Show. Shoot them in the back. his head like a melon!
Hey, Roman, why don't we do some bowling?
Nico, this is a great American activity. We bowl together and you pick me up in next hour.
I am coming to get you, Roman.
Rangers lead the way! Move!
Keep up the pressure on those RPG teams. If that prisoner gets hit, my swimming will. Alan, switch the M203.
Warlord, this is Hunter 2-1. Requesting you special target is a white 12-story apartment building. Over.
Drop some rounds on the front door.
Hunter 2-1, this is Warlord. Solid copy. I have Devil 1-1, flight of 2, F-15s online, stand by for relay. Hunter 2-1, this is Devil 1-1, flight of 2 F-15s, time on station 15 mics, holding at 3 Sierra Northwest, holding area 9, carrying 2 JDAMs and 2 horns, over.
Can you see him? Can you see him? I don't see Jack.
All Hunter Victor, this is Sergeant Foley. Prepare to engage. We're taking sniper fire from multiple directions.
Shoe shine! I got your shoe shine right here!
Don't worry, I'll bring it back with a full tank. Jesus! Please don't pull me. Ooh!
Don't let those rods and pistons down. Use Trago oil for your automobile because champion drivers choose.
You can stop all this now.
No. Something's wrong. There's way too much activity. Yankee 1-3, report. Yankee 1-3, report. Weaver's gone dark. Here, see what's out there.
They're at final countdown. There's Soyuz 2, scheduled to launch 10 minutes after Soyuz 1. Comms building.
Mason, we get activity on the road. Check it out.
Damn, it's Weaver. He's burnt.
Your colleague is unwilling to explain his presence in this facility.
Who the fuck is this?
Surrender now, and you will be allowed to leave.
It's Kravchenko. Dragovich is second in command.
This is your only warning.
There's nothing we can do, Mason. Weaver's done.
No.
Your choice.
This is not good.
Where's this?
Mason! Mason, get over here. Crossbow, explosive bolts, now! I'll cover the left.
Enemy moving in from the north. We're pinned down.
We got company. They're pinned down. Take out those vehicles. That truck! Watch the truck!
Gunfire's drawing attention. Those assholes are on the way back. I'll secure the line, you take the shot. Make it quick, Mason.
Go, go, go!
Weaver!
Yeah, believe it or not, despite not being on the system requirements for it, Farming Sim 15 will run totally fine on Windows XP. One thing that I definitely noticed is that XP does seem to create somewhat of a bottleneck when it comes to more recent titles, namely games like ETS2 and Black Ops. The games ran a tad bit more sluggish than I know they should be running on this machine, given these were games I used to play all the time on this machine when it was my main rig. Since I made the commitment to make the entire, or at least most of, the video on this machine, I've been writing the script for this video, recording narration, creating the YouTube channel, and editing, or at least trying to, and unsurprisingly, I was able to do most of that just fine. Writing the script with Word 2010 and recording audio with Audacity were a cinch, along with creating and managing the channel. The editing part, however? And with that, we come to the last segment of the video, the editing process. I will say this segment has turned out to be longer than I expected it to be originally, and you will soon find out why. One of the things that I really wanted to do with this experiment was have the whole video be made within Windows XP. The writing, editing, and uploading were things I planned to do within this machine. Although the writing part worked well, as it should have, because honestly what kind of computer can't handle a simple Word document, everything else ended up not working out the way I had hoped. For starters, let's take a look at the editing process I went through for my GTA 3 20th anniversary video, which was entirely recorded and edited on this machine. After finishing the recording session for that video, I was pretty much immediately ready to dive into the editing process. Initially, things were going fairly smooth. The intro section of the video was created separately from the rest of the video, simply because I wasn't sure what to do for an intro. So I figured I would just make that separately and then tack it onto the beginning of the full video. The intro went by fine, editing and exporting was easy. However, the full video itself was another issue altogether. First off, since the video was recorded in 1080p and was a roughly 6GB file, things were already off to a somewhat choppy start. Though scrolling through the video, cutting it up, and working with the timeline were smooth enough, not entirely smooth but good enough to work with, Vegas would consistently use up all page file memory, Windows would have to allocate more, and then Vegas would crash. I tried my best to get Vegas to consistently work, however my efforts were fruitless, attempting to expand the page file, as well as closing any other applications open. I eventually was finished with the editing process, which all in all wasn't terrible. Aside from the occasional crash and freeze, it was generally pretty smooth. The real trouble started when I wanted to render the video. Now, this being a 21-minute 1080p video, it was going to take some time to finish. However, I was unable to get the video to render. It would only get so far and then throw an error at me complaining about a lack of available memory. Well, after some troubleshooting and looking for solutions to the issue, I eventually came across a video that helped me figure out how to get it to render fully, involving things like listing Vegas under the Data Execution Prevention whitelist and changing settings from within Vegas. Finally, I was able to get the video rendered. Though it would take some time, a mere 3 hours later it was done, so I decided to have a look at how the render turned out, and yeah, that's not good. And following that, I decided it would be best if I just cheat and fire up my main machine, move the Vegas project over to that computer, and just render it on there. Since it was 5 in the morning and I had been struggling with this since about 1 AM. So, long story short, my plans to edit and export this video from the XP machine were sort of cancelled. Though the script for this video was entirely written on it, I elected not to bother trying to get this video done on the XP machine, and instead left it up to my main PC instead. And so I guess that's where this experiment comes to an end. It's been a fun time revisiting XP for the past month. Although I do still use it quite a bit with several computers in my collection running it, I've never got the chance to go back and remember what it was like to live with it, at least for a little while. Would I recommend anyone going back to using XP? Aside from doing an experiment like I did simply just for fun, not really. Although XP is still surprisingly usable given that it's 20 years old now, compare that to Windows 98's 20th birthday in 2018. By that time, 98 was already 10 years out of support on the software side and about 13 or 14 years out of support on the hardware side, making 98 pretty much unusable in the modern world. Windows XP's community, along with the much larger back catalog of support for it, means that I was able to do this experiment without major issue. But as a daily system, I would seriously recommend moving up to at least a Windows 7 by now if you are that stubborn about moving up in the tech world. But that's all from me for now. I hope you enjoyed this video. It was a long time in the making, something I was very much into since Windows XP is one of my favorite tech things. So yeah, anyway, I'll see you all next time. Take care.